When I was growing up, I was in a non-religious home, but when I was 16, I became a Presbyterian, and I was really committed to my faith. As a young convert, I would lead student ministry and youth ministry and Sunday school. I would teach on Sunday school, and my Christian life would involve praying and reading the Bible every day. Ever since I was very young, I felt the call into ministry because I always felt like I had gifts in the area of teaching and caring for people. So in the context that I was in, teaching and caring for people would naturally lead me into ministry in the Presbyterian church. So I developed my gifts in the local church, attending conferences, and I even went to seminary. I was a pastor for 10 years, and I really enjoyed being a pastor. I did that with my heart, and my spiritual life involved studying the Bible, praying, time alone with God, and caring for people. I really liked to care for people, to help couples in crisis, to help students, to help young couples, youth ministry. And being a pastor was something that really brought me joy. I did not live ministry because I was frustrated. I did not live ministry because I had a fight with the leadership of my denomination. I just left ministry because what I came to find out demanded that I live ministry. I am Brazilian. I grew up in Brazil. I live in Brazil. And Brazil is a Catholic nation since day one. But in the 19th century, the U.S. sent lots of American missionaries to Brazil, missionaries from the Presbyterian denomination, Baptist, and many others. And if Brazil was a Christian nation, you wouldn't need to spend resources to send missionaries there. So if those denominations sent missionaries to Brazil in the 19th century, that could only mean that they did not consider the Catholic faith as a Christian faith. So Protestantism in Brazil is very anti-Catholic, and that's how I grew up. That's what I was taught, and that's what I taught. The Catholic faith is not the gospel. The Catholic faith went astray from the Bible, from the early church. And I was taught that the Christian church had been faithful during the first, the second, and the third century. And then on the fourth century, because of Constantine, the church went away from Jesus' message, from the apostles' message. And it spent like 1,200 years in this darkness, the Dark Ages. And 1,200 years later, God rose Luther and Calvin, and then the church came back to its original design. That's what I learned. That's what I taught. And all the Catholic practices that we see, like praying for the dead, devotion to Mary, transubstantiation, they were things that were added after Constantine. All right. In 2015, I was arguing with this American Baptist preacher. We were talking about infant baptism. And I was quoting Bible verses to support infant baptism. After all, I was Presbyterian. And he was quoting Bible verses to go against infant baptism. And then I used an argument that I thought that I would win the discussion. I said, well, you see records in the 2nd century, which means before Constantine. You see records of the 2nd century fathers of the church talking about baptizing our children. And the answer that he gave me made my jaw hit the ground. He said, Eduardo, you are right. But if you are going to be using the argument of the ancestrality of the practice to justify the practice, you are going to have to accept devotion to Mary, images, and praying for the dead. And you don't accept that, do you, my Presbyterian friend? And he laughed. And I said, no, I don't. But the truth of the matter is that I had no idea that those practices have been being practiced by the church since day one. And because of that conversation, I started studying more deeply patrology, patristics, and Catholic dogmas, Catholic doctrines. And that started a process that lasted 4 or 5 years. And after a lot of study and after falling in love with the church that Jesus founded, after falling in love with the love of Our Lady, with the story of life of the saints, and with this beautiful realm of new possibilities that the Catholic faith is, I had to make a decision. So I am used to saying that becoming Catholic was not as much as a choice, but it was something that the facts demanded of me. I was scared to death when I realized that I had to become Catholic, because my whole livelihood depended on that. I was a full-time pastor. So the church paid me a salary, paid my rent, my social security, my health insurance, everything. The way I provided for my family was by being a pastor. I was not a pastor because of the money, but I was a full-time pastor and I needed the money. And it was a struggle because I had wife, I had kids, and I had the obligation to provide for them. So I was very, very scared. But 2 things helped me during that process. The first one was I did not become a pastor because of the money, because of a paycheck. So if I did not become a pastor because of that, I cannot remain a pastor because of that. That was the first thing. The second thing was God has promised to provide for me. It's not the church, it's not my job, it's not my paycheck that provides for me, it's God. And if as a result of my decision I'll have to suffer, I'll consecrate that suffering to Jesus' Immaculate Heart. So that 2 things, that 2 thoughts helped me. And then I resigned my position at the Presbyterian Church. I spent time without a job, without any money. My relatives helped me a little bit. I went to live with my dad again. I was almost 40. Can you imagine? Like almost 40. I didn't have... Overnight, I didn't have a home anymore. I had to go live with my folks, and they were very nice, but it's no one's dream to come back to their folks' home when you are almost 40, but it was God's provision in my life. And after a while, I started working as a salesman for a company. I was working on commission. I didn't have like a salary, but I was making enough to make ends meet. I can tell you that providing for my family was the biggest fear that almost didn't let me become Catholic, but I had to take a step of faith, and God honored that. Also, another struggles I had was with my flock. because they were like, oh my gosh, our pastor went crazy. My relatives, especially from my wife's side, they are very committed to the Presbyterian faith, and they were disappointed. My friends, all my friends, my whole life was structured upon the ministry. So it was like a social suicide. I had to start over. But sometimes people say that I went back in the journey, and what I tell them is, if you realize that you are in the wrong way, going back is a wise decision. When I was finally accepted into the church, it was amazing. And I'm not saying that just because of how I felt, because I do not build my faith on my feelings, but it was amazing to know that I was in the church that Jesus founded, in the church that the apostles passed along to their disciples. It's not that I didn't have Jesus before. Of course I did. I had a relationship with him, but it's that now I'm part of the fullness of Jesus. St. Paul, writing to the Ephesians, by the end of the first chapter, he says that the church is the fullness of Christ. So I entered into the fullness of Christ. And I remember this parable in Matthew 13:44, when Jesus talks about a treasure hidden in the field, and this man finds this treasure, and he sells everything to buy the field. He does not buy the treasure, he buys the field. And maybe the field is not worth everything he has, but the treasure that is in there is worth a lot more than everything he has. So I had to give up a lot of things to become Catholic, but it was nothing compared to the treasure that I found in the Holy Catholic Church.